Well, let's get more now on the asylum seekers heading to Nauru. Our political correspondent, Latika Burke, joins us now from Parliament House. Good morning, Latika. Has the government said anything more about the first transfer of asylum seekers to Nauru?
Good morning, Karina. Yes, the Immigration Minister Chris Bowen has just spoken with ABC News Radio, and he's outlined some more details about what will become the first transfer of asylum seekers from Christmas Island to Nauru later this week. He says the initial transfer will just be a very small group and that they'll be living in tents. Now, the government and other immigration types have been referring to Nauru at the moment as a tent city, and our correspondent over there has been showing back some pictures of the tents that asylum seekers will initially live in. Now, the Immigration Minister says he makes no bones about that. Chris Bowen says they are working on some permanent structures on Nauru, but for the moment, the short-term accommodation will be these tents on Nauru. Now, will children be sent there? Well, that's something the government's remaining very coy about, Karina. On one hand, the Immigration Minister is saying that people with particular vulnerabilities, he can exempt them from being transferred to offshore processing centres. But on the other, he is saying that he doesn't want to send any type of message to people smuggling syndicates that it might be okay to get around the rules by filling boats with children. So there are some mixed messages there, but ultimately the government will want to talk tough, as they did with the Malaysia people swap, because the last thing they want to see is people smugglers trying to circumvent those rules.
But the boats still keep coming, Latika.
Yes, Karina, 4 boats yesterday arrived carrying nearly 300 asylum seekers. Now, Nauru has a capacity estimated of about 1,500, and when PNG is up and running on Manus Island, that facility is expected to house about 600. Now, more asylum seekers have come than the capacity allows for at the moment, Karina. So that is something that will be worrying the government. And the Immigration Minister said this morning that with the Malaysia people swap, they had what he's calling an announcement effect, that as soon as he announced that, the news did get through and the boats did diminish somewhat. But they are coming in high frequency now, something he readily admits, and he says that people smugglers are basically now trying to squeeze every last dollar out of what he says is a pernicious trade.
So how long will asylum seekers spend on Nauru? Because there's a bit of confusion over this.
Yes, Karina, this is a case of the government saying two different things depending on the audience. For Nauru and PNG, in their memorandums of understanding, both countries have favoured faster processing times than lengthier ones, and the government has agreed to that. But they've made that subject to this idea of no advantage. Now, this came out of the Houston report, and what that basically argues is that an asylum seeker who comes to Australia by boat should be sent to these offshore processing centres and basically expect to spend the amount of time there that they would if they are waiting in Indonesia or Malaysia. Now, how on earth do you calculate that? Well, the UNHCR, Karina, says that there is no average resettlement time. They don't know how the government is going to come up with a figure that they can apply. Now, the Immigration Minister, Chris Bowen, for his part, was saying this morning that the UNHCR would take into account various factors. For instance, he used the example of a single pregnant woman waiting in a detention camp in Indonesia. He says a person like that would be resettled quicker. So it may be a more case-by-case basis than what the government has said so far. But those lengthier detention times will be something that will worry many members in the government, of course the Greens and some within the coalition, because that was the whole reason why they unwound the Pacific Solution when Kevin Rudd was elected in 2007. Now, the minister responsible for that was Chris Evans, and last night on Q&A he didn't seem to have too many regrets about doing that.
I'm actually very proud of the decisions I took as Immigration Minister, because it was about bringing a new set of values to immigration. You might recall under the Howard regime we saw children locked up behind barbed wire. We had a situation where I think most Australians were disgraced to the place we got to. And what we focused on is trying to bring some values back, where we treated people with compassion, where we tried to show some respect for their dignity, but also maintain strong border arrangements.
So, Karina, that was the former Immigration Minister Chris Evans on Q&A last night, and he said later that he predicts this issue will be the problem of the century.
Latika Burke in Canberra. We'll speak to you a bit later on.